a very exciting session for you today. So I'm Don Wall. I'm going to be your host as we talk about live production in the cloud and what that means. And we explore that over the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes. Let's see how we get on. We've got Jen Snad, who's joining us, the Managing Director of Logic Media Solutions. We've then Kieran may be on his way, so if he does get here, then we'll get him to join in. But next we've got Sally Hubbard, who's principal from Sally Hubbard Consulting. And then we've got Sean Snyder, so VP of Production Workflow Cloud Services at Ross Video. Welcome.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us here.
Brilliant. So we're going to start off with a little bit of 101. What is live production in the cloud? And Sean, I don't know if you can give us a quick intro. We had a little chat about this beforehand, and it's not necessarily a very quick answer, but Sean's going to enlighten us.
Oh, it's not a quick answer. The cloud live production takes many forms. So I think probably what we're going to be focusing on talking more about today is the traditional gallery and the workflow from sort of pre-production through to distribution, and sort of what the state of the union is on how it's working in cloud. So that could be everything from your production switchers through to distribution, through editing, but also it's about bringing in content from lots of sources, managing it through lots of different chains. And really just talking about sort of what the state of the union is, what's practical, what's not, what's working, kind of, and where we've seen success and where we've, maybe more importantly, seen failure, and what the evolution is going to look like. So, is that a fair overview? It's a really big topic, and different maturity levels as well. So.
Definitely, and we're going to explore some of where cloud is kind of today, where some of the challenges and the barriers, where some of the opportunities are, and also importantly, I guess, in terms of us all coming from companies and businesses, where some of the commercial sit as well. But what I might just start with, and Jans, if I can come to you first, just in terms of where cloud is at today, sort of the state of play today, and what it means to you within your role and within your business today.
Yeah. So. We are based in Germany, so we're not really the ones well known for the most progressive, innovative things to do. But even though in Germany we're already discussing cloud production, and just as Sean said, cloud production for me is something where I say anything produced to distribute somewhere is kind of a production, but the way what you could do is tremendously different. You can have one or two, 3, 4 camera production until a show production, which is 25 cameras, whatever, very big. For us, we are designing these infrastructures, but I have to admit that a lot of the customers we're talking to are kind of the startup companies who are building a greenfield infrastructure, who are designing their production the way they want to produce based on something entirely new. Compared to these companies where I said, I produced this way with an Obi-Wan, etc. over the last 20 years. If you want to migrate these kind of production into the cloud, that's a total different story, because they have different assumptions, they have different expectations on what it could be, what it could cost, compared to where are the benefits of having the ability to switch things on and off as you want them, or even keep, as one of the things you just said, with commercially, you need to learn to switch off. That's something completely different from what you have done in the past. So if you leave it on, it costs money, and if it costs money, it's not beneficial if you don't use it. So these are the things.
Brilliant, thank you. Same for you, Sally. For you, what does it mean in terms of what you're seeing with your clients, what you're working on?
So just to say where I come from, Sally Hubbard Consulting, not being very descriptive. My background's with really metadata and media asset management and standardization. I started in cultural heritage before moving over to TV, so I'm coming from a slightly different place. And for a lot of the work I'm doing, there's just we're dealing with some of the things that aren't quite there yet, like the lack of maturity, lack of standardization, lack of portability and interoperability across cloud platforms is really not there yet. Nomenclature isn't there, vocabulary isn't there, So I'm working with some things that are attendant to that and the development of standards. SMPTE, of course, doing a lot of work there. The EBU, MCMA, microservices in the cloud. I can't remember. But anyway, they're doing really great work. The OSA, there's a lot of really interesting work and strategies going on. And going back to what does cloud mean, it means it's a very ill-defined term, right? Public cloud, private cloud, on-site private cloud. That's a very different beast than the public cloud. And there's a lot of rhetoric, especially a place like this, where, it's so easy, right? You just walk into the public cloud, and we're really not there yet. It's a very rapidly evolving and maturing field. But there are a lot of pieces that need to come together to make that all work. So that's kind of where I come from.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. Same for you, Sean. What does it mean for you today at Ross Video?
Yeah, so one of the benefits I have with working with Ross is this really broad portfolio. And we do everything from like a production switcher to acquisition to editing to newsrooms. And quite frankly, depending on the discipline, there's different levels of maturity. So for example, newsroom systems and some of those softer tools like asset management, like those software-based interfaces, they've been able to go in the cloud for many years. We've had a newsroom system in the cloud since I think 2014. So that's not a new technology. That's well established and proven. What we're seeing more and more is the live side of it, is the bringing in large volumes of live video content, muxing it together, and enriching it with video and graphics and things like that, and then compositing all that together and bringing that out. That is a reasonably new development. And there's sort of two pieces that make this possible. The technology has to be there, and it has to be commercially viable. And I think that second part is so vitally important, and I don't think a lot of broadcasters necessarily have taken the time to really understand the economics of cloud and where it makes sense and where it doesn't. And this is something I think even we're learning along the journey. The dynamics of cloud, and the other big shift is it's a shift from traditional broadcast engineering to IT, and you're moving into an IT-centric world. And we as an industry have to learn to adopt. Our customers are certainly along that journey. I think that's kind of leading into some of the stuff we'll talk about a little bit later. But as we move to this IT-centric world, this is the new way things that are. So, like I said, cloud means a lot of things to many people, and depending on which product space you're in, there's different levels of maturity. That some things are a lot easier than others.
Maybe something I could add here, what I have seen at least here at the show, there are at least 4, maybe even 5 ways on how you could design, pay, and commercialize the way you use the cloud. One thing is you can go to somebody who offers you a managed service. Just credit card, off you go, you get your entry points, your egress, that's it. The other part is you go and rent infrastructure on AWS, for example, and deploy the software on it, and have a control plane and a processing plane, and let this run. The other one is you have that on-premise in your system, in your data center, and take the software from the cloud, pay it OPEX-wise in the cloud, and deploy it on-premise, or you just even purchase your own data center, purchase the software, run it into your data, all close, and use that. And you could even work on models where this software you purchase is paid on consumption in your own data center. So it's at least 5 ways on how you could understand cloud production. And for every potential, there is a customer which fits into that. And that's the difference or the difficulty as a company like we are, identifying what kind of business model fits your request, what you want to produce. Because if you are, I just talked to a customer a minute ago, they have no understanding on how AWS works. So what do? You probably recommend them talk to a managed service provider where you just need the credit card and off you go. But you're locked in because they only obviously give the products they own into that. So if you want to have a Ross Vision Mixer in the cloud, you want to have, I don't know, a Grass Valley slow-mo operation tool, whatever, that only works if you do it by yourself. You need to build it yourself. You get a control plane, the processing plane, etc. So that it means completely different things to whoever you talk. And then even if you talk about this, you can also make it in this direction, saying, I have an IT infrastructure like a software-defined network on premises, and I want to have these signals shifted into the cloud, and then produce something with it. So there's so multi-dimension development, innovations are happening, where even I'm working constantly on this, mostly get lost. And I question what is a customer experiencing who are producing shows since 20 years with Obi-Vans and are now supposed to answer questions regarding the cloud. So just wanted to add that, sorry.
I
Brilliant.
think
Thank
also just on the thing about the shift from broadcast engineering to IT, it's really a shift to IP, as in both senses, Internet Protocol and intellectual property. So it's a shift for the IT guys too, right? So it's not like it's just an easy, your standard IT team could just pick this up and do it. That's not the case. So that's
True.
Brilliant. Okay. Brilliant. So I think we've heard about sort of standardization, the need for in a maturing area for cloud. I've heard about actually there's lots of different commercial models that can be applied to different areas, but again that can become complex and complicated. And actually we've heard that there's a lot of different applications and usage for it that are very dependent on kind of the context and situation. So I guess maybe Sally, if I come to you first, where do we see the biggest opportunity at the moment, given where we are with today's current situation?
Biggest opportunity? Well, I would say I spent my whole career saying, you guys don't think metadata is sexy, but it's going to save your butt. And this is becoming more and more true with the more we move to a more virtualized or non-tangible scenario, the more you're dependent on good metadata, high quality, consistent, complete, good identification, automation, recommendations, microservice workflow, all those things. You need to have really robust metadata in place. And metadata has become, like all of these things, they're shifting, right? We're not just talking title tags and the rest of it, we're talking linked metadata and knowledge graphs. And I'm a big advocate of the W3C semantic technology for knowledge graphs. The proprietary graphs are also cool, but they're proprietary. So that having that ability to talk about interoperability and linking together services, having a knowledge graph as part of your stack, I think that's an enormous opportunity, and it could really make a big difference to really, not on its own, but addressing some of the issues we've talked about. We're having to tie these things together, these different approaches. So I guess I would say metadata and knowledge graphs.
Brilliant. And I guess that it manifests in terms of the maturity of the whole industry in terms of moving towards that interoperability and standardization.
And it also talks to this IP, the idea that we're moving to IP. This is semantic technology as a web native technology. So when we're moving to this IP, it's a nice fit in that stack. It works. I mean, nothing's perfect and it's evolving itself, but it's been around for a while. It's standardized. You can use it across any tool you buy that pulls out an RDF thing. You can put it into any other tool. It all works across. So nice for API communication, all those pieces that we're trying to put in place. So.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Sally. And Jens, if we look at opportunity from your perspective, maybe more of a commercial angle, where do you see that opportunity at the moment?
I think the biggest opportunity is in producing things which you were not able to produce before because of commercial limitations. This is where you go with cloud production the most easiest way. So it's if you do not have expectations or massive requirements, which makes like latency, N-1 communication, all these things which you are used to have in an Obi-Wan. Like in Germany, for example, the third or the fourth league of Bundesliga, or the second league of handball. Those productions are not possible by sending people there with an Obi-Wan and send them. It's way too expensive. These kind of opportunities I see very good for cloud production. That's one thing. So meaning building things or producing things which aren't profitable, feasible without it. And the other thing is, which I see a big potential, is educating the people you just mentioned who made the shift to IT, that shifting the infrastructure to IT enables you to use time or consume-based production software. So if you have everything in 702110, or if you're using JPEG XS, whatever, and you are now able to get those signals into an hyperscaler and rent your infrastructure if you don't need it. So kind of use the cloud what it is supposed to be. Everybody knows this from storage. If you need storage because there's Olympics, you book some and then you just archive them and get rid of the storage you need. That is now possible with the infrastructure being shifted to IT, 2010, whatever, or even NDI, it doesn't matter. And then you can suddenly say, well, I need a vision mixer. You can even put it to such an extent, I promise you one day, that you say, I need an ME. I need one more mixing effect layer in a vision mixer. Let's book that. I purchased 2 because that's okay for 300 days of the year. But I need this when there's election, whatever sports event, I need 1 or 2 MEs more. I need a graphics system more. I need a multi-viewer. There's no need to purchase a 30,000, just making up a number, 30,000 multi-viewer in the future if you just need this 3 hours a week. You will just hit the button on your controller, it will launch the infrastructure, gives you entry points in AWS, and gives you the output, and you just route it to your monitor. People would say, well, how about latency, etc., etc. But with codecs like JPEG XS, or even there are on the show manufacturers who show HEVC encoder with 2 frames delay, you can see that this delay or latency topics gets irrelevant more and more because it's getting faster. And with that, I'm pretty sure that you need to rethink any cost investment or cost allocation for building new studios, whatever. I just said I talked to a company just in the show. I said, you just go with a Mercedes Sprinter. You have some, if you want, you have some processing power in the back or just low latency encoders, and you have the equipment to control it, but there's nothing left. There's no cooling, nothing. It's just up there. You switch it on, you pay, let's say, 100 euros an hour for using it, and you switch it off. Instead of investing 200,000, you pay maybe 250 euro, 300 for the production. The problem is I'm earning money on selling the hardware, so I need to adjust my business model here. But that's I can't hold it back. That's the way how it's developing. So you need to address that, understand that, and if you're making money with reselling that kind of products, I highly recommend that you don't let this opportunity go to understand it here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, and I guess Sean, in terms of the opportunity that kind of you see, where would you put in terms of priorities where the opportunity sits?
Well, I'm going to reframe the question a little bit, and I think where is the most practical application today for cloud that we're seeing, and the most common one where we're seeing real use is disaster recovery. It's this idea where natural disasters happen, and you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but you also don't want to have to buy 2 of everything. Failures happen. So being able to have that instantaneous ability to move to the cloud, if for some reason your key production's unavailable, that's one real use case we're seeing for that live production content in the cloud. The 2 other ones that really come to mind, and sort of building on something you said, is it allows customers to experiment with new productions without having to make a really big upfront investment. That could be new types of content, new formats. Sometimes it allows you to cover a lower tier of, say, sporting event that was never financially feasible. High school sports for a local community. Well, if you're not going to go and spend $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in gear to cover that, but if you're spinning this up for a couple $100 per production, all of a sudden the financial viability is completely different. The economics are completely different. The other one we're finding is large sporting events, or like the Olympics is a great example. or elections, those types of things, where historically you would have a broadcaster, we call, in our side, we call build to peak. I love build to peak because I'm going to sell a lot of gear. But you're going to use that gear for 2 weeks out of every year, and then you have a baseline. So let's say you have 30 users on the system as a baseline. That's what you need for your daily production. And then you're going to burst to 200 users for 2 weeks to cover one event. Today, a lot of broadcasters buy gear, and they let that 170 users and all the software and licensing and hardware sit dormant until they need it. The cloud allows you to expand and grow. So you basically still have your baseline use case, and then you burst, and you can, look at the business models. You talked about subscription for those 2 months, and we've seen a lot of success in this, and we're actually we're seeing a lot of broadcasters reach out when Olympics are great because we've had customers that want to bring a production on air with a few weeks notice. I don't know how that happens because Olympics is not like they only plan them 2 weeks in advance, but it's the ability to say, all right, we're going to expand this system dramatically with minimal hardware footprint and just use it and consume it, and frankly let the cloud vendor worry about having to buy that hardware and amortize the cost over the rest of it. So those are the use cases that we're finding probably the most successful. Another sort of subtle one is academics, is places like schools where they have semesters and they have they're only going to run this for one semester a year, so they purchase either subscription or they just basically buy the pieces that they need and they run it for the 4 months of the term, and then they can turn it off, and no harm, no foul. So that's where we're seeing probably the most real use cases today. I think we hear everyone's talking about cloud. Oh, we're going to do all this live production in the cloud. We're not seeing the adoption yet. We're seeing a lot of POCs. We're seeing a lot of experiments. We're not seeing a lot of real use. We will. It's inevitable. It's coming. The maturity, as we've mentioned, is growing. But those are the cases that we see today actively, widely used, are those ones I sort of mentioned.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think that's a really interesting view, especially around the scalability and the flexibility that cloud brings you in that using subscription-based models, making it more efficient, essentially, which I guess, as you're saying, Jens, reduces the cost of ownership, so you can kind of do more, you can kind of try more. But a lot of that still is based on the maturity of the tool set that is kind of coming through. So we've looked at some of the advantages and where we might be able to deploy that, where were you deploying that today. Where are some of the big risks in doing that? And I think, Jens, you talk not necessarily about a risk, but maybe about a limitation in terms of latency and things like that. Mm-hmm. What are the risks when you're looking at this development of or application of cloud production?
There are two, at least, and probably even three or more risk. Risk number one of the biggest is staff. The staff doesn't understand it. The staff, they need boycotts so that they just refuse working with it. That's one thing. The other one, obviously, is technically, where I guess Sean has way more experience than I have. And the other one is financial risks. Is if you don't do it right, it suddenly costs way more than it would have been purchasing it with an CAPEX model. I see that. I don't know how it's in the UK, but in Germany, we are having quite some customers who are saying, I'm not an OPEX company. I don't have that much money to spend. I have 100,000, but I can't squeeze that over 5 years, paying it every month X amount of money. So which means our customers need to adapt first the way they could spend the money. That's one risk I have. They like it, but they can't really reflect that, especially with public money. That's even worse. And then obviously, the normal, when it comes to technical, the normal topics like you always have. What happens if somebody attacks the infrastructure? What happens if somebody breaks into it, etc. I used to avoid these kind of discussions because if there is, I'm just talking AWS, if there's one data center which should be secure, it is AWS. That's why we're just giving it everything to them. Even the product we develop, we're using for security login, AWS Cognito. So I don't want to deal with that. If that really something goes wrong, it's AWS responsibility to get this fixed as soon as possible. If you have your own private data center, that's a totally different story. I see the risk if somebody could break in and really bring you into trouble by, I don't know, switching off your signals, doing whatever. So there are technical risks, but I think you are way better than I am in that discussing that. I see more the risk that people don't use the cloud the way it is supposed to be and then get the wrong impression on what it is capable to do.
And maybe just picking up on the security risk, Sean, I don't know if you can maybe expand on that one.
Yeah. The analogy I sometimes like to use is the cloud is really easy to get started and very difficult to master. And having people that understand that is, that's the hard part, and finding that talent. It's a great set of tools, but, it's like you can shoot yourself in the foot, and unfortunately, by shooting yourself in the foot, you may blow your whole leg off in the process if you don't know what you're doing. So talent and finding that talent is really important. Now, the security side of it's interesting because part of the reason I say it's difficult to master, there's a lot of nuance to deploying a cloud environment securely. There's a lot of things that you have to take into account because now you've effectively got some element of public infrastructure where historically everything's been sort of isolated. When I started in this industry, if you looked at how a network was traditionally designed for a broadcast network, it was very open. So you basically think of it like a donut. If you can get into the network, you can move anywhere. And now, as we're moving to cloud and we're moving to more IT-centric, we're moving to this idea of zero trust. So it's more like a pizza. If you can get into the slice, but you still can't move around once you're in there. And so we're seeing these topologies that are completely and wildly different. And as a vendor, we have to adapt because our customers are expecting us. I would say that, and I've probably gotten in trouble for this more times than I can count. I don't think the vendors have been nearly fast enough to adapt to changing security trends as they should. I look at protocols that we use as an industry, as a vendor community, to have systems talk that are completely and wildly insecure. Most traditional, I'll pick on one. Something like VDCP is still used in almost every single traditional broadcast facility, but there is no security around VDCP. It is you open up a socket and you fire and forget. And the expectation to secure that is, well, the IT people can wrap that for me. But that doesn't work anymore. And as customers are expecting to do these zero trust type approaches, it's requiring us to rethink some of the legacy protocols and the ways that our systems talk and communicate. Moss is I love Moss. I know Moss in some circles is a dirty word, but we actually, one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, we took the Moss, which is an open standard in the industry, and we actually created a secure version of that, and we opened it back to the community about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's now starting to get adoption. And that pattern, that paradigm that we created, we're actually looking at other protocols and implementing as well. But the problem you've got is that there's just so much also legacy and so many other systems that, we still have this device and it doesn't upgrade and the vendor doesn't want to support it anymore, so we have to use it. So I think that the vendor community has been slow to adopt and probably slower than they should. With that said, I know we have a really big renewed focus on security. We've got an entire department dedicated to basically creating protocols and procedures around how our software gets tested, 0-day vulnerability tracking and managing that. But it actually it starts at the core. So every developer in our organization is expected to undergo security training and defensive design principles at the core of everything that they do. Because as you start moving to cloud, security is that much more important. Because if somebody gets in, they have basically access to a lot more data than they maybe ever had. And we've seen, I won't name names, but there was a really large broadcast group in the U.S. that had a pretty big exploit. And they were effectively off air for weeks because of it. And they got in through one old legacy system, from what I understand, and they just traversed their way through the network and took the entire operation offline. And we've seen these cases, and obviously no vendor ever wants to be the one that created that. But at the same time, this is something that's coming up more and more. You also have to think that the reason security is important is because a lot of these broadcasters are good targets. They are target-rich opportunities to spread messages, and they have an audience. Sometimes they maybe have a polarizing slant one way or the other, so they become targets. And we're seeing more and more this development in the media community. So, it's security. It plays hard at everything that we do, and I think we're seeing adoption now finally, which is awesome, and I'm really happy for it. But it's taken us far too long to get there.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sally, from your perspective, the risk that you see.
It's interesting. I come from the archival world originally, and in that world you have the concept of the trustworthy digital repository, so a different angle of trust and security, and actually just a sort of extension of disaster recovery too. But now if you're moving your library to the cloud and pulling in and out of it for all this long tail redoing and talking to the model, redoing, that's the technical term for the CapEx model and the OpEx model, you really have to think about moving your IP to a cloud repository, security angles, but are you going to be able to still pay that subscription? Are you going to lose access to your IP if some technical issue? And it's something it isn't really spoken about that much because it's so much part of the day-to-day grind in the broadcasting world. But there are longer implications beyond the disaster recovery and the immediate trustworthy thing. They're all part of a piece. But you don't want to just lose your library because you don't like AWS anymore, or there's no portability, or you haven't got any bandwidth, you can't get it back, right? You can't, for whatever. There are any number of reasons. You can't. The days when you could go to your cupboard and pull out your tape and get it are gone, and that takes a whole different skill set and management approach and understanding. And what do you do? Do you keep something on site just to be sure, like that? And that was a standard archival thing. You have multiple copies, and I guess I'm saying don't trust AWS to necessarily do that. Not to pick on AWS, because obviously in internal cloud structure they have all that, but you don't own it, you don't control it. So it's something to think about, and that's with my archival hat on. Something could go wrong because it's all virtual. So.
Brilliant, thank you. So a lot to be aware of when we're looking to deploy this. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions from the audience, but hold on to those for a second. I'll come to them. So one kind of quick final question before we get into questions from the audience. So if you were to project, so I'm going to ask you to sort of forecast, put your cards on the table now. If you were to project, say, 5 years into the future, and you sat back here and we're having the same debate, talking about the current state of the nation with live cloud production, where would you see that being? And maybe if I start with you, Sean.
You're going to see a rapid maturity, and it's going to be a lot less than 5 years. Over the next arguably 12 to 18 months, I would expect to see another rapid acceleration of live production technology, and frankly, it's part of adoption is getting comfort, and cloud is not necessarily well understood yet. It's been around a long time, but it's not well understood within this community. And I think, as we start seeing more and more proof of concepts, and as we're able to prove the technology works, you're going to see a lot faster adoption. 5 years out, that is a lifetime in technology. But like I said, I think you're going to see a lot more as equipment ages out. So as you are looking at a natural replacement cycle on older gear, I think it's going to start you're going to start asking more questions about, all right, do I replace this with something that maybe is cloud enabled, or do I start looking at new workflows? Those are those forced changes, and sometimes that's what this industry needs, is that forced change. But I think the other thing we're going to start having to really look for is the workflow, because cloud is beyond just the technology. It's what workflows and what does it enable. The pandemic forced us to start thinking about remote production in a way that we never had to, and we had to do it fast. It was like that, everything shuts down and we're getting a phone call saying, how do we go fully remote tomorrow? And those types of one-off events drive those behavior. I hope we don't see another thing like that in the next 5 years, but I think it's forever changed how we view, and we're just going to see this evolving maturity of cloud pretty rapidly.
Brilliant, thank you. Sally?
I think there's going to be more open standards coming in, like the ones you develop. That's going to have to happen. Everyone will really care about metadata.
Perfect. And Jens?
Yeah, I think I agree to what Sean said, that it's getting way more faster. It took me roughly 8 years to evangelize SDN, software networking in Germany. Now it's deep per se, not standard, but it's definitely taken way more into account building that than SDI infrastructures. It probably takes then, let's say, 4 years now that the people are really considering going into these hybrid models. It takes its time, especially because they need to understand the technology and they need to see the benefits. As long as we still compare lift and shift, nobody uses it, I'm pretty sure. That's what I experienced over the last years. If you want to have an on-premise SDN like with 2110, and they compare it with a router, an ordinary SDI router, there's no chance. That's lift. It doesn't work that way. You need to understand the advantages this kind of cloud-based production delivers you, and then it will grow dramatically. But this is my team's and everybody's in the industry's job to present these advantages to the customer and make them the step into that technology as easy as possible and the most affordable.
It's also going to be more. Everyone's talked about the lack of knowledge. There's going to be more knowledge. There's going to be a deeper knowledge base. People are going to be more aware of what's needed and how to cloud. So that's going to be.
And there's quite a journey to go on. And I think the question of the skills and train people. I think Sean, you mentioned it about having people that really know what they're doing, that knowledge within your organisation. I think that's a whole another debate that we could get into on that one. But that is fantastic. Thank you for the roundup. So, any questions from the floor, please? Yes.
Hi, Pat Griffiths, Simply past president. And Sally, I have to agree with you. My joke is I never met a data I didn't like, and we need more of it. But since this is a SMPTE session, and there are some problems that need to be addressed, what's the 1, 2, or 3 standards issues the panel would like to see SMPTE work on?
From what I have seen in the past, and the past, let's say, 2-3 years, there's no real complaint for me about standards when it comes to video formats. I'm pretty impressed that JPEG XS went so fast, coming out of the TICO world and making it a standard which is now well understood and accepted by the customers. That was quite impressive. I didn't expect it to be that fast, and the rest seems to be, for me, pretty okay. I mean, we're working with NDI, HEVC, AVC, JPEG XS, and 702110. That's all defined and works pretty well in interoperability without any issues. So that, from my side, production-wise, I don't see any necessary. It's probably more a question to Andy. He is the one who knows all these. But no, not from my side. You?
I have probably 3. One is particularly controversial, so I'll leave that one till the end. Orchestration in general is definitely something we're seeing more of. Part of being able to deploy successfully into cloud is being able to automate. Developers and development pipelines have been doing this forever. It's full automation. A developer writes a piece of code and they commit it, and it's live on Facebook in 20 minutes. This is what they do. So being able to automate, we've got technologies for that, but being able to then provision stuff and manage it in a really seamless way across different cloud vendors, that's definitely something that would be welcomed. That's one. The other one I touched on earlier being, finding ways or a more consistent way to take some of this old protocols and find ways that we can wrap them. We can do it securely. It allows us to do ground to cloud, cloud to ground control and video pathing. That's a tough one. It also ties on the security. Third one, and my controversial one, something between NDI and 2110. Because I will be completely honest, 2110 in the cloud is horrendously overkill. It's also incredibly technology challenging and expensive. PTP, which is the basis of 2110, doesn't work. in the cloud. You can fake it, but it's wildly inefficient for most of what we do. NDI, on the other hand, is much more heavily compressed. So when you bring content into the cloud, I'll just take us through one really quick workflow. You're bringing data from a ground into the cloud, and maybe we're doing that with I don't know, like WebRTC. I know there's a lot of them, but I'll use WebRTC because it's low latency. We bring it into the cloud, and then we de-encapsulate it, and then we convert it to something, and then we bring it into a production switcher. And then that video has to go from one instance to another instance to another instance to another instance, because we're going to add different, especially as we move more to microservices, you got to move this content from all these different pieces. And every one of these, you're doing a compress, decompress, compress, decompress. So by the time the video's popped out the end, your quality sucks. And heaven forbid you want to do a chroma key or anything on there, because the signal is degraded. And but by the other hand, we can also do complete uncompressed. We bring it in, and say we bring it in with SRT, and we decompress it once, and now we just baseband it. But you need huge instances. If you're 2110, if you can get it working, you're talking 10 gigabits worth of traffic to move a single signal, and it's just not practical. You're talking about so much added cost to use huge instances to handle this traffic with very little reasonable gain. So there's got to be something, and I think as a body, and vendors and broadcasters need to come together to find something a little bit more practical that can be more flexible and scale in that way. So that's my opinion. I know that there are vendors out there working on some cool stuff. Obviously, I'm keeping my eyes open for it, but this isn't something that we want to define. The other thing is, I think we need a video standard that is not controlled by one vendor. So not controlled by one vendor. That is actually a true open standard. I know 2110, of course, is an open standards body. NDI is not. NDI, at the end of the day, is a proprietary. It's controlled by one vendor. And it's up to their whim, and that's really tough as well. So that's my ask of the community is let's come together and really take a good look at this.
Well, there is a media in the cloud working group in SMPTE, which what I'm hearing is not getting enough vendor input. So I would encourage you to come with those problems. And SMPTE tends to do boil the ocean kind of solutions. But clearly, maybe the recommended practices, take some subset of 2110 and let's make some practical end-to-end solutions, do some interoperability testing, et cetera. Anyway, I'll stop.
If I can add one more note actually to that, so because it was brought up, JPEG XS is often we hear that is a really good compression standard option for 2110, and it is, but it's so insanely expensive it doesn't necessarily scale. So if it doesn't, maybe it's not super expensive for small production switcher, but I don't think our customers, if we're trying to do, say, a big routing fabric in the cloud, are going to be willing to spend $20,000 or $30,000 just to pay for licenses by the time you look at all the different inputs and outputs. So trying to find something that's a little bit less patent encumbered would also be welcome.
Yeah, I'm just talking on the media in the cloud, and there's another, which is a great group to look at. I'm going to give a plug to the Open Services Alliance, which is a feeder to SMPTE, which is looking at microservices and glossary stuff, which I'm working on, of course, because that's so. The thing that we've been talking about at SMPTE is we need a quick mechanism to get some of these things, or a quicker mechanism to get some of these standards out. And the OSA having this relationship with SMPTE is a way maybe of doing that, and looking at some of these other pieces that are emerging, the API microservice-driven workflows.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally. Anything else from the floor? Okay. Well, I think we're probably just hitting time there, which is perfect. So just remains to say thank you first to my panel. So to Sean, Sally, and Jens, thank you very much. And to you guys as well for turning up at this early hour on a Sunday afternoon. But I hope you enjoyed that. Some really interesting food for thought. So thank you very much. It was a media and broadcast in partnership with SMPTE view of live production in the crowd. Thank you.
Thank you.